We are lighting the candle, a world that works. I'm Bill Correll, and I have with me one of my besties who's become really a good friend over the last sort of 2 years. And I think I mentioned in the last recording that we did a couple of weeks ago that we're going to be changing up the format a little bit. And to that end, I think today I wanted to toss out an idea to you, Jan. And first of all, it might be worthwhile this far along to kind of restate who we are in the world, what we do, to feed the cat or the dog, as it were, and what kinds of things are we committed to seeing, as we're going about our day. Before we talk about the subject, I think people really need to know who you are, in my opinion.
Oh, thank you, Bill. And the feeling is mutual. Yeah, we have gotten to be good friends. So that's always a blessing in my life anyway. Can never have too many of those. So, who am I? I am a health coach. So I try to help people navigate their health. And I say that because I feel like we're a human experiment. And each one of us is different, even though we're so much the same, but we all come from our different backgrounds and our different genetics and our different sort of histories of what has happened to us throughout our lives. And we are, we can take all the elements of health and wellness and kind of customize them so that we feel the best version of ourselves in every moment. So that's what I like to do for people. I like to empower them to kind of start to make those choices and to kind of look at, and really ask themselves, like, how are they? What do they need to feel like the healthiest version of themselves?
It's really interesting and it's great. And you do spend an awful lot of your time, as I have, especially over the last couple of years, not only providing healthcare for people, but being around while they are in the process of being provided healthcare. Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
And
And it's an interesting road to navigate with other people.
and so can you maybe say a little bit about your professional training and your background and that sort of thing, just so people know that when you speak, uh, you're just not just some gal at a bar somewhere who's kind of, spewing out whatever she heard recently. There's some things that I think that people really need to know about you, and they'll listen to you possibly a little bit differently, I think.
So, my training, if we go back to like the beginning, is my degrees are in biology, immunology, and infectious disease with a diploma in tropical medicine, which was kind of interesting. We don't get many tropical diseases in our country, thankfully, but it was really kind of fun. I worked in the clinical research and in the more public health realm for 24 years and then left that. I took a lot of what I learned and then got very interested for myself in a series and a number of holistic, more like alternative modalities from Reiki and yoga and essential oils and reflexology, and got very interested in those because I wanted to feel empowered to be able to help myself in some way. I'm
Yeah.
not a diagnostician, but my attitude was that, well, if somebody gave me a diagnosis of something or told me what they had, or for myself, I got diagnosed with something, it allowed me the best way possible to navigate whatever that was. Um, I grew up in a very Western sort of traditional medical home. So I'm not anti doctor and I'm not going to tell anybody not to go to the doctor and not to take their medications or whatever. My way of living was very much I wanted to try to do everything as natural as possible. And if that meant more traditional modalities, great, if that's what's needed. But I think a lot of the times we can do a lot more for ourselves than we actually realize and believe. And I think you do need to do that because you have to have a strong foundation no matter what modality you're speaking of. If I'm not working off of a solid foundation, whether that be nutritionally or physically, just general overall health, anything that happens to me, I'm a lot more vulnerable. So when I work with people, it's kind of interesting because I combine both worlds in my head. It's like in my brain, everything is being like, I'm like, okay, I understand what's happening on a more, medical or more physiological level. But I also have enough knowledge of like the more alternative modalities to say, okay, where we're not only physical beings, we're a combination. We're physical beings having a spiritual and emotional experience at the same time. And to heal, you really need to kind of work with all three.
Hmm. So that's interesting to me. And what that means is that we've got lots to talk about. I think the fun part of what I heard you say is there's kind of a dichotomy in terms of your scientific background having an awful lot to do with the physical world. Probably a lot of observation, a lot of the scientific method of looking into the interactions of different types of drugs that would be needed with tropical diseases and whatnot. And then there's the other side, which is that realm that kind of embraces the body, but it is not seen. It is the unseen part of it, the spiritual side, and that is very powerful too. And it is best accessed through language. So the neat thing, I'll just take a moment here and just tell folks who I am, and then we'll
Mhm.
get into a conversation because I'd like to talk about the unseen and maybe some of the invisible things. We may have talked about a few of these over the last couple of years. Don't really care. This will be a different conversation. We haven't had it before. So I'm Bill Correll. I own a small business. Started out as a computer company back in 1989. I've been doing that ever since. And in the meantime, I've also been a fairly successful up and down realtor, real estate. Not so much with the selling side, but the buying and investing side. And I think anybody who does what I did knows that it comes and it goes, and it's got its real high highs and its real low lows. But in the meantime, I also started developing two or three other lines. And one of the things I decided to do probably around 97, 98 is to see if I could take on some coaching clients. And I did. And then I started using my coaching technologies with business clients, and they would hire us to do different kinds of things within their organizations, which we enjoyed doing. And so now all of that is just this. I actually have 67 college credits, and I've never found them to get in the way of anything I want to do. So it never held me back, to the best of my knowledge. Uh, what I will say is that the neat thing that is really lighting my life these days is the opportunity to talk to a lot of really great people. And I also think that if you are on LinkedIn at all and you follow Jan Jeremias, you're going to find out that not only is she incredibly knowledgeable about her multiple crafts, and I don't even know, what would you call your level of training with regard to for doing yoga?
Um, Gosh, I would probably say, through the years, we go by hours of training, so I would say probably cumulatively, even though it might not listed because I'm not technically, I probably have probably about 500 hours of training through the years.
Yeah.
Um, I've been teaching for 24 or so years. Um, Interestingly, never really thought of myself as doing this like in a business sense or in a career type sense. I
Yeah.
did my original yoga teacher training because I was interested for myself. I graduated and all of a sudden I was like, people were asking me to teach and I was working full time at the time. And I was teaching probably 9, 10 class, like, multiple classes a week, like almost every night on the weekends. And finally I turned to myself and said, oh, I guess I'm a yoga teacher. Like it was just like, so, I didn't, because it was just kind of like, you're good at this. This is something you're like, you love to do. And it was just kind of funny when it happened because it really was like, oh, like, I guess I'm supposed to do this.
And it's funny. I can so identify with that from my own perspective. Half a dozen things that I used to just love as hobbies As a matter of fact, the first rental property that I bought was more or less to try to figure out to solve a tax problem that I was having back in the early 1990s. And then once I did that, it was like holy mackerel. And I did that with coins, and I did it with collections and guitars and all the rest of it, and started getting into the retail business there on eBay and whatnot. But the point is that I found, and maybe you did too, that when you have a hobby that you really enjoy, all of a sudden it turns into a way to make a living as well. And even if there are the highs and the low points, it's still something you're committed to having in your life, so you continue doing it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I've always felt that way about yoga. I never wanted to own a yoga studio. Like that wasn't where I wanted to go. I didn't really want to have the pressure of having a brick and mortar facility. Like it just seemed like having to meet rent and do all those things. I was just like, I don't want that. But was really happy to teach for other people and to take on private clients. Like that was really because it kind of kept my love for yoga without having that pressure, personnel problems as far as hiring other teachers and things like that. Because no matter what you do, you can't teach all the classes, so you do have to hire more teachers, and then also just worrying about paying rent and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, which I've never been sorry about, because especially during COVID, it was an industry that was hit quite hard. So, especially if you did have a brick and mortar facility, like you had like an actual, yoga studio that people came to. It was a really hard 2, 3 years.
I think it was for everybody, Jan. And I really want to say that anybody that had fixed costs, overhead that had to be paid regardless of income through that period of time, my hat's off to everyone who made it through, and my hat is really off to those who didn't, because it was an abnormal situation that they didn't cause. And so in your situation and in my situation, fortunately, we were able to talk to people and keep things going at some level, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then also help a lot of people in the process, which was a true gift. It's like, especially, as I think as things evolved, especially in the beginning and even afterwards, the isolation and a lot of the things that we talk about, the loneliness and all those other things, which were so challenging for people and still are. It was a really big gift to be able to support people in some way, to help them through and to alleviate have them a way to work through their fears
Yeah.
and the unknown.
Yeah. So that's really cool. So here we are now, ladies and gentlemen. You know a little bit more about the two of us, but for example, if we were making a trip into Central Park, we barely have gotten to the point where you can see the gate. Okay. What's really fun about both of us is that we have a lot of experience that pretty much comes out while we're talking. And since we're changing our format a little bit from having a panel of 3 or 4 people on per week, we're going to do a lot more with having guests and that sort of thing. And I'm committed that we continue to have conversations that are based in, around, and generate empowerment. Uh, I think there's a lot of places that you can go to have your time stolen. You can go on Facebook and you can play games to your heart's content, and there's nothing wrong with that. But what we're real interested in doing is allowing people a fresh view of what their life is and who they are, and maybe there's something somewhere along the way that they can pick up from our chat that they take home with them, and now all of a sudden it makes a difference in a tight spot. So
Bill, can I just add one thing?
absolutely.
Uh, I think that one of the things I'm hoping with these conversations is we spoke about loneliness a little bit, I spoke about it a little bit, but in addition, I think as we go through the world and things happen to us, what we can feel at certain points in our life is, am I the only one in the world who's gone through this and who feels like this?
Yes.
It's almost, and I think we question it because we get a lot of messages from the outside world, like, we should get over things faster than, by a certain time, we shouldn't be influenced by something. And then what ends up happening is we feel like abnormal in some way. Like, is there something wrong with me? The fact that, we've spoken a lot over the past few months about grief. I'm not over this person passing anymore yet, and it's been 5 months or a year. You know, am I crazy kind of feeling? And I think that what I love is the fact that I want people to realize that there are other people out there in the world that have gone through it, that understand that maybe they didn't go through your exact situation, but hopefully they can relate to it in some way, having gone through their life experience, and to realize they're not alone in the way they feel is
Sure.
really, really important to me.
No, I get that, and that what you're describing, I'm hearing is as having a shall we say, an advanced degree in empathy. Not necessarily that you understand completely or can articulate what the other person is going through. Sometimes you don't at all. However, being able to, and one of your favorite things to say that I love is, and it's all language, and it's powerful to take the language and make it mean something in each of our lives. But the notion of holding space for someone, there's a generosity, I think, that's implied in that basically says you're committing yourself to whatever it is to be in service to a human being, to allow them to have cared for boundaries in terms of their safety in a particular set of environmental conditions, and that you'll be a steward and you'll be a faithful companion and a hand holder and or cheerleader and or anything else called for in those moments, or just be willing to sit back and wait patiently and watch.
Absolutely. And I think that one of the things that you talked about is, even if you have nothing but offering someone your presence is, it's not an easy place to be. I mean, I think as human beings, I think the majority of human beings we have this feeling of wanting, we want, it's very hard for us to watch someone else in pain or something else in pain. It could be, an animal. It doesn't have to be a person. And our tendency is to want to fix things and to make it better. And
Right.
sometimes that's really not our job. Our job is just to hold space for that person because I've been in different experiences in my life. I didn't want anybody to fix what was wrong. I wanted people to listen. Nothing else. I wanted people to listen. Just listen to me. I don't need you to fix what's wrong. I can fix what's wrong. I just need a way to, I just want you to listen.
Yeah, I'm laughing because what that brings to mind is this couple questions that I've learned over the last 10 or 12 years. Is like when my wife starts complaining about something, which she doesn't do very often, thank God, but when she does, she gets my attention. And then I've gotten smart enough to realize that I need to ask her, honey, is this something you want me to do something about, or do you just want me to hear you?
Right, exactly. Exactly. Um, and to honor people where, as much as we want to help people, and, this is very hard for me. And I think in what I do is because sometimes I realize that people make choices, which do I think they're wise choices? No. But it's very hard to sit back and let them do it anyway because it's not my life.
Yeah.
And so, whether that be a family member or a client, sometimes it's very hard to sit back and know people are not making the choices that are the best for themselves. But it's not my job to judge, and it's not my job to sit there and make that decision for them.
Yeah, I'm kind of hearing, that part of this holding space thing is to taking a stand for that person and taking a stand for their eventual positive outcome. In many cases, giving, the full ride of them figuring it out for themselves and just being close at hand if they need to touch somebody and make sure there's some reality around.
Absolutely. And I love that. And I think it really comes down to holding space, like, for someone. um, in whatever choices they make, or whatever they decide. Eh,
Yeah. So to say a little bit more about that, whatever you're hearing, if you're giving yourself up in the process, it's not that. You're actually giving what you have earned as extra, the excess that you have to give back to relationship, the excess that you have to give back to the world. And sometimes you don't have it when the situation starts and you need to go get it somewhere and you have to come up with it very quickly. But this is where your training in advance, does a lot for you, where you make a decision early on. Is this something that you can do something about, or is this something where you just need to be there and be the real person, and that doesn't necessarily have to do anything more than that?
No, yeah, I mean, there are particular situations where you might be called upon. I mean, to I want to say it's almost like an in between space. Like, for example, and I'll use this because I just experienced it last week. So I'm spending time with my mother. And since I was around, I went to two doctor's appointments with her.
Yep.
And if I was lived close by to her, I would do that more often. But these are, is just being another set of ears in a situation which can be stressful, which can be, daunting, and just asking the right questions. If the person neglects to ask the right questions, not taking over in any way, but just saying, and if you go, and I've been asked by people to go with them in that situations, whether they're family members or clients or other scenarios. But I do think it's really crucial, I think, to have some sort of health advocate, I want to say, that is there on your behalf,
Yeah.
with your best interest at heart, not making the decisions, but at least another set of ears. So if you go home and it's something you have to talk about, they have all the information that they need to make that decision,
Yeah.
whatever the decision is. So I think it's sometimes like that kind of in between role. If you're not really making the decision, but you are a set of ears, you're not just sitting there being quiet necessarily. Because I think that people look at holding space as, as being quiet. Like I'm not supposed to say a word.
Well, no, I think it is 100% active. You're coming with all of everything you got. And I was just watching a YouTube video before we came on here. It was fascinating to me. And what happened, it started out, it looked like one of the typical videos at a university where somebody put up something that was intended to get a rise out of the folks that were, in the building in front of it. And it turned out to be something quite different entirely. And basically, there was a sign, and I'm going to go into an area here that we're not going to really talk about in terms of true, false, or anything else, but just to give you an idea of what this person did to demonstrate to me about holding space for somebody he'd never met before. And so he put up a sign that faced the building, and it was a sociology building at a university, and the sign said there are two genders. And then there was another sign about 8 feet away or 10 feet away that said there are many genders. And then on the ground, he had taped lines in between, like a continuum of from two genders to many genders. And he was first flipped off by the people on the top floor who said those are I mean, that's just nonsense what you're doing, and you're trying to plug people in and activate and trigger and all that kind of stuff. And he said, we'll come down here and talk. So they came down. There was about 8 or 9 of them, and they surrounded him. And as he's standing there, and he said, "Would you be willing to put yourself on one of these lines in terms of what you personally believe?" And of course, they wanted to engage him and try to change his mind or win him over to a philosophy or something, which is cool. That's what you do on campus, right? And so they would say, well, here's the problem. You're stating that there's two genders, not like it's a question or anything. And he said, would it work for you if I made it into a question? And they said, yes. And I said, I will do that. And so then the next thing was, well, it also doesn't take into consideration, the person who's looking at this and who they are, and have you provided for a safe person here that can provide comfort, if they're going through stress or any of that sort of thing. And he said, would that work better for you? And they said yes. And he said, I will do that. And so everything that they said along the way, he didn't engage them, to try to, factually discuss the this or the that. All he did was take care of them. And every concern that they brought up, they said, yes, I'd like you to do that. And he said, that's perfectly fine. I will do that. And then finally, after about 8 or 9 of these things back and forth, he said, I have a question. Do you think my agreeing to all of this would be enough?
Mm.
And then he kept his mouth closed. That was a remarkable demonstration of a lot of intentional self-control, and done in a very scientific process where he was more or less going to be the questionnaire, and he would react, in such a way. He didn't give people back what they were giving him. He never flipped anybody off. He just said, come talk. And I didn't get to finish it. I can't wait to see the rest of it afterwards. But my point is that I think that that's a really, really powerful way to engage people in a subject that is emotionally charged for everyone involved, to get to the point where it's no longer a train wreck. And
Mm.
you have to create that in language. You have to create that space in language and conversation. And it's a mutual construct, and you have to get people into a trust relationship where they actually believe that it's going to be okay for them.
It's such a powerful story, and it reminds me of a podcast I listened to. It was a recording of Krista Tippett from onbeing.org, who gave a was interviewed or did a lecture. I don't know if she was interviewed, kind of interviewed, but did a lecture at Google.
Yeah.
And it was called The Art of Generous Listening. And it was really amazing, where, you know, that whole idea of active listening, of, allowing people to have opinions, and, and to create that space for people,
Yeah.
around a topic which they might not necessarily agree with other people, and to be able to allow people to be, to think the way they think and, feel, without, in a place that's almost non-judgmental, this feeling of like, okay, you have every right to feel the way you feel.
Yeah. Yeah, and the neat part of that is there's another term that goes along with that. It's called granting being, okay? That who you are right now and who you believe yourself to be is perfectly fine exactly the way that you are. And you do that not by saying those words, you do that by engaging that person where they are, and from where they're coming, and it's extremely powerful. And sometimes it might be the first time in a long time that anybody ever listened to them powerfully that way, and just allowed them to be who they are, or be who they're struggling to find out who they are sometimes.
I like that idea of struggling, like or taking the time to get to know someone, or
Sure.
to see who they are, on a level that is not necessarily obvious, to some people, especially if they happen to be so different than you are.
Yeah.
And I love when I can draw from my own life experience or from situations I've been in. So I think action speaks so much louder than words sometimes, especially when people are different.
Yeah.
And when you watch people and what they do, I think of that with kids a lot. I think kids learn by watching, and they model behavior they see to a great extent. So, it was demonstrating that, yes, I'm coming from a world where I, was criticized to a great extent, and, a lot of familial situations. And then when, and then as my brothers, and I'll be honest, my brothers have watched who I am and how I am in the world and how I am with my parents and all that kind of stuff. I think they held a very different opinion of the choices I've made and of the life that I've had, because they look at my actions and, my actions of, let's say, demonstrating love for my parents. And all of a sudden, a lot of what their ideas about who I am have shifted.
Yeah.
Like, I think they see the person beyond the surface. And I think sometimes that's what it takes. You look at people and you see how they act and they are in the world.
Yeah.
Mm.
While you're saying that, I'm kind of reminded of a quote that my father-in-law used to say. He was a well-trained attorney who was a country gentleman lawyer. Never made a lot of money, but he had a farm and he had several properties, one of which I'm living in and sitting in right this minute. Thank him. But he would always say a man is not without honor save in his own home or save in his own house. And essentially what that meant is the whole world can think you're like, I don't know, the best thing ever and most intelligent and so worth listening to. And you go home and your family, it's like, yeah, 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 go sit down, snotty, or whatever their, derogatory term was to make you feel empowered while you were growing up, right? And sometimes it just goes right back to that. And I think for me, when I've always felt like I was actually gaining in the world in terms of, I didn't look elsewhere. I didn't look outside, to what did my peers think, what did my coaching folks think, what did my business people think. I'd go back and find out what my mom thought, or I'd go back and find out what my dad thought, and it takes them about a nanosecond to put me in my place. And then, every once in a while, my mom or my dad would come out with something that just amazed me. It wasn't like anything anybody else said to me, but it meant so much. I carry it with me today. And my mom had this way of turning a phrase. And at one point she said, "Bill, you're becoming a man of consequence."
Mhm.
And she said, "You're making a difference in the world." She said, and that's not a small thing. And I carry that with me now. She's been gone since 2012, uh, but I get energy still from her and the things that she said that were like that. Now there are other things that can take that and dash it against the rocks in a heartbeat. Don't get me wrong. It wasn't all good. You got to take it all, and sort out what you want to keep, right?
Right, right. And I think there is, sometimes going back, and I think it's something that we all long for. I mean, it's just my feeling anyway, or my opinion is that when those significant people in our lives actually make a comment like that,
Yeah,
it does mean a whole lot in the world, to us, much more so than, the accolades we might get or whatever. Is like those are like the most powerful things for
yeah.
us.
Well, I'm telling this story, and I know you are too, so that our listeners can kind of take this on board. And I want you to know that through your words, they are so powerful. Language is pretty much it is the coin of the realm. And if you're careful about what you say and you're authentic in terms of giving your praise, or even if you give too much praise for a while, it's better than having that one thing that just knocks the whole house of cards down again. Uh, However, there are people who think it's the boy named Sue deal that you're either going to get tough or die, right? Well, sometimes you need to go to a place where you don't have to fight for your life for every moment and every next breath. Sometimes you just need to go somewhere. And like the Facebook meme says, someone gives you a hug, some chocolate, and $2 million. That gets you where you want to go.
Mhm.
And the $2 million sometimes is just a sentence.
Mhm. No, absolutely. I have this conversation with a lot of people, being in a field which is, you know, has its challenges, as far as uh is people have to be in the place where they're willing to look for something that might be on a deeper level and isn't something, I work with people every day who've decided that they want to look for the deeper causes of why they feel the way they feel, whether that be physically or emotionally, you know, and look beyond the surface. And that takes time sometimes. So it requires patience and the ability to say, okay, like I look at the things that I've done or the people I know, and it's kind of like, okay, well, that didn't work for me.
Right.
And saying, okay, well, now I have to move on and get to something else and figure out another way and see whether that works better.
Yeah.
And you have to be willing to be really patient and to say that things aren't going to change in a day or in 5 minutes necessarily or an hour. It might take a little bit of a lot of patience and some investigation and some kind of discerning and reflecting to actually get to whatever is, when I use the word bothering you, because it is bothering you in quotes, because it's kind of like with whether that kind of fits in with all the kind of different aspects that can be out of line or off at the moment.
I love it because it's kind of funny. When I was growing up, my mom always said, "Well, what's the matter?" Like, to me, that was equivalent to "What's wrong?" However, as I got older and I started to learn that that is a legal term, like, what's the issue we're discussing at the moment? What is the matter, right? We've got the matter of Jan versus Bill, and whether or not there's enough dog food, or something like that. But the point is that most of our life as we're being raised is coming from a background conversation is there's something wrong around here.
Mhm.
There's something wrong around here. In order for us to get past that, there has to be a transitional opportunity where either we're going into it ourselves. You can never do it alone. You got to have a guide. You really need a Sherpa to show you the way around. And I think you do that really well. My question to you would be, as you mentioned that there are some people who will say that they want to get involved in the matter of themselves at a deeper level. Do you invite them to do that and maybe talk a little bit about what that might look like and then wait for the idea to come back to them later? How do you address that?
Um, I think that one is I think you have to help them or guide them to find a reason why they want to make, like, what is the reason they want to make the change? And that has to be something that's very personal and kind of motivating to them.
Yes.
Because, I was on a call the other day. Somebody was talking about quitting smoking. That was just the example they were using. And they were saying that, when they quit, why they quit. They quit because they wanted to be able to be there for their kids. It was like they were having like stamina and energy issues and breathing issues. And all of a sudden they realized, like, if I don't make a change here, how old am I? My kids are pretty young. I'm not going to be able to play with their children or grandchildren or whatever. So it was a reason enough for them to decide that they were going to give it up. I
Right.
think unless we find that personal reason for people, which might be different than any other reason for anyone else, maybe it's the same, maybe it's different, they're not going to do it. Because I think when things get tough, they don't have that reason as to, like, to keep them going. Oh, this is the deeper reason why I'm doing this again. Like, and the reminder that this is the deeper reason, and someone there to say, okay, remember why you're doing this. Why did you want to do this again?
Yes.
Because otherwise it becomes very easy to kind of say, okay, well, I'm not doing this. This is too hard. This is the way I deal with stress, whatever it is.
and it's fleeting. You know, the as being related to whatever it is. I know that there are some groups that call it your why, or they call it your big picture, or they call it your vision, or whatever, and you get to a time, and it's almost like being in love with someone. There's a euphoric stage when you're not quite sure if you're in love or if you've got gas, or something along those lines. And as time goes on, you start to make sure that there's a big distinction between how you feel and the decision that you make about the situation. And that decision is constantly being tested. And so when you think in terms of having an external reason, like you're doing it for some reason other than it's a core thing that you've got inside of you that you always carry with you and is immediately accessible, I've found those come and go. However, there are certain things that you and I have going on inside of us that if we never said anything out loud, they would still be there a year from now
Mm.
or 5 years from now. So the neat thing is that as people start to talk about, I mean, it comes with emotion and tears and joy and all the rest of that kind of stuff. However, right afterwards, there's kind of a not that, it's not quite that, and it's not lasting and satisfying enough that that language has to be upgraded, and it has to be renewed, and it has to be re-experienced in the body, and then when that happens, man, you're good to go for a while.
Yeah, and then, and I do think it is so true, because I think that at points sometimes it's not enough, like whatever that reason is for you, and you have to look deeper and find a deeper reason, or something in life happens that, since I don't think anything's by accident, so something in life happens that causes you to look deep, because the universe has a funny way of doing that. It's like, oh, okay, you're not seeing this. I'm going to give you something so that you do see it.
Yes. Postcards from the edge or otherwise, right?
Exactly, exactly. And sometimes those signs, or whatever you want to call them,
Yeah.
are big, and sometimes they're a phrase or a quote or you know, a message or something, and I say a message in the fact that, I always say I've gotten some really interesting inspirations in Trader Joe's in the card section. Like sometimes they're that easy, and you'll sit there and you're like, "Oh, now I get it." For whatever reason. And it's really funny, but it happens.
Well, yeah, and never look down your nose at a cliche or a Chinese fortune, okay?
Right, exactly, exactly.
Been doing this for a long time, and if they didn't have some sort of overall appeal, they would not stand the test of time. They'd be gone by now. So I think we're constantly kind of skirting around the edge, and the unseen, the invisible, the energy side. There's three things in the universe that I think are very powerful. One is gravity. Another one is energy itself. These are all things, such as magnetic energy, electrical energy, light energy. These are all things that don't cast a shadow that we can see. And then the last one is love, which is, according to Einstein, the most powerful of the three. And I don't know if he said it. I agree with him, and because I agree with him, I think he's a smart man. Uh, I- so here we are, we're trying to make sense out of things that didn't get said so far out of what did get said in many cases. For
Mhm.
instance, get a text message from somebody that basically says, I cannot believe what you did. Stop. What? Now what? What did I do?
Exactly.
Your subconscious is going battle stations, battle stations. Whoop whoop whoop.
Mhm.
What's going on around here? Something's wrong. Oh, there, got that triggered again. So, and then you find out that somebody says, "Well, you ate the last of the peanut butter," or I don't know, something equally as devastating as that, right?
Right, exactly. It's so interesting when that happens, because of where the mind goes, automatically, which is usually to some sort of catastrophe, or catastrophic or fear based, like panic
Yes.
kind of reaction. And then all of a sudden, like you said, it is like something mundane.
Yeah.
And and without any explanation, I think that that's when, we don't assume it's good. If somebody said that, or they said, "Oh my gosh, I have news." That's the other one. I have news. And you're like, okay, good news, bad news.
IRS calling again? What's going on here, you know?
Exactly, exactly. And then all of a sudden they say, oh, it could be a positive thing, but our body reacts in a way that's kind of that fight or flight mode, where cortisol and adrenaline start to, get pumped through our body. And it's like, okay, danger, Will Robinson.
Yeah, yeah. Robot with arms flailing.
Exactly, exactly.
So, the neat part of that is there's work you can do. And it's called work for a reason because it's basically developing some muscle in the area of calming yourself, when those um, hormones and different types of enzymes take over and start governing your thinking process. Most of the time what happens after you've decided there's a huge problem and there's something wrong around here, the fight or flight can have it feel like your life is at stake and you really have to do something about it immediately. But sometimes all there is to do is to allow yourself to breathe, do it in such a way that the cortisol, and adrenaline just get a chance to dissipate and leave your body. And then you come back and you decide whether or not you need to make a telephone call now or just wait until they reach back out and give you the rest of the message.
It's right. I've really worked hard on this one because my tendency is probably to go into that panic mode quite easily. And I'll have to sit there and say, okay, breathe and just realize that you have no idea what is going on at the moment. And as soon as it does, you'll, if needed, you're going to do what's required.
Yes.
But until you know the facts or the situation, don't, really there is nothing to panic about.
Yeah. Well, sometime there is, and you're absolutely correct. There'll be plenty of time once it's been defined. And it's that old saw. I can't remember who said it. I think it might have been Will Rogers or Mark Twain, but I've lived through many a horrible experience in my life, some of which actually happened.
Right, exactly.
So
Exactly.
at some point, you got to be, in charge and make a decision for yourself. Who are you in the matter of your own sanity, your own equanimity? I love that word. It's. I think that's a 75-cent word, but it basically means, practices and mindfulness that allows you to be serene and peaceful and to have be self-contained and unassailable, if you will.
Yeah, and I always just tell people just, I've been talking a client through a lot of anxiety lately. And, just even transitioning yourself into focusing on your breath, like just that simple um thing. Just, okay, inhale, exhale, literally saying those words out loud to yourself, getting to be more present, like noticing, sounds, smells, the way your body touches whatever it's sitting on, like just to get you sort of in the present moment for a few seconds. And it is a tool, like it is like you said, it's a muscle that you need to work.
Yeah.
And I always say that after all these years, if you were to sit there right now and tell me, okay, go to your breath and get in the present moment, I could do it like probably without even like in this direct conversion. And no, I'm not anxious now. So it is a little different. But I think it's something if we practice when we're not in those situations, we recall it a lot quicker when those situations happen. It's just like people will say to me, well, I'm not anxious now, so I don't really need to do it. And I'm like, because you have to get that baseline of being able to call upon it really in an instant's notice.
Yeah, it's training wheels sort of thing, where the muscle is not there. Just know that. And it's worth having because all you have to do is think about the really nasty 7,000 thoughts you had in the last 4 days. It's not necessary. Don't give your life over to something that never happened? And I like what you're saying about the breathing. That is something that anyone can do. They can learn how to box breathe, by in inhaling to a count of four, exhale, holding it for four breaths, exhaling to a count of four, holding it for four breaths, and do that until you're back present. And what I really like about the whole notion of mindfulness, I kind of call it, intentional noticing, and
Hmm.
that is where you're coming back here and you're experiencing your surroundings through all of your senses, all six of them if possible. And the metaphysical side is just as important as anything else, but the touch, the smell, the taste, all of that. And then when you're in that space, you don't have time to be worried about whatever it was, and a lot of times you'll even forget what the heck it was.
And if you didn't forget what it was, it just seems to what I when we talk about holding space, it actually is a way to hold space for ourselves
Yep.
when we do that. And so I think if anything, what it does is just create a little bit of space around it so that it's not reactive.
Yes.
You're not acting in a reactive place. You're acting from a conscious place, then hopefully,
Yeah.
or a place of presence, which is very different. And somehow energetically, it's very, very different. And I use the example of, last week I got, or a few weeks ago, I got like a text or something from someone. It was very, very confrontational. And my immediate reaction was to fire off a text right away. That was like my initial sort of almost reflex reaction of like, okay, I'm going to write that person back and tell them a piece of my mind kind of thing. And then I paused and I wrote the text and I said, no, don't send it. Like I could feel the place and see the place where I was coming from,
Yeah.
and then just said, okay, you know, and actually doing whatever else I had to get done for the next whatever, how many hours, and then looking at it again and just saying, okay, like reading the original text again. And obviously, since I hadn't sent it, what my text was, and what I wrote was underneath it, getting ready to send. And then I just kind of looked at it and said, well, is this necessary? Like, how could I phrase this? It's very different energy because the original was very reactive.
Sure.
I mean, I was annoyed or upset or sad or whatever it was, the emotions, at the moment, I can't remember what I was going through, or maybe all of the above, you know?
Well, it is so exemplified by, again, something that Albert Einstein said, and that is that matter uh, owns the space that it lives in. Two things cannot occupy the same space at the same time. And he
Mhm.
said, oddly enough, a thought is a matter, and it is definitely a thing. And so that means that even thinking, you can't do two thoughts at the same time. I defy anybody to show me that they can do it. I've never been able to. So I think he's kind of right about that. So while you're being mindful, you're occupied, and whatever was there before, it'll come back and it'll remind you. But at the same time, you're making a choice and a stand for yourself. And I love what you said about holding space for yourself in that instance.
Yeah, I mean, I actually don't know if I ever thought about it until, I think of holding space for other people. But really in that moment, what you're doing is holding space for yourself. And because if you think about it, whatever was that initial reaction that you might have, you had all those emotions, you're not denying them in some way, and saying, "Oh my gosh, what goes on in our, what do we think about? I shouldn't feel like that. How do you feel like that? Like, you're this horrible person for feeling jealous or whatever it is. And then all of a sudden you realize that's what you're doing, because just like you would do for someone else, you're just holding space for a little while.
Yeah, that pause in between stimulus and response. There's an opportunity there to put something else in place. And I loved your question, what do I want to say? What does this mean? Ask a question. And when you get really good at automatically asking questions all the time, you will be surprised at how the world shifts for you. And I watch people. I'm a big time folks watcher, and I see people who are fielding really nasty comments from folks, and the good ones find a way to ask them an empowering question in response to it, you know. Uh, for example, you're the fattest 6'4" guy I've ever seen in my life, and my answer back to that would be, and if I weren't, would that matter to you? Or if I weren't, how would my life be different, and how would your life be different? I think the main thing there is you don't have to have a catcher's mitt on to catch absolutely every bad piece of incoming that's there all the time. Sometimes you can duck and let it go by. Other times you probably do need to at least catch it and play with it for a little while and see if it's important, in the next minute or half hour. And then always there's this opportunity to learn how to have that space in between the stimulus and response, have a question in it.
Yeah, I what you said reminded me of something. I think there are situations. I mean, there have been personal circumstances where I could tell that at that moment I was not strong enough, let's say emotionally, to be around certain people because of the fact that they tended to be critical. And as a self protective mechanism, I avoided. And I'm not saying, but then it got to be the point where there were certain things that were more important and I had to be in their presence.
Right.
But I started to do that at a time in my life where where I was truly authentically me. And I wasn't going to apologize for who I was and kind of thing. And I was able to withstand that, whatever it was. I was like, they cannot, agree with me, and they cannot approve of me, whatever that is. But it didn't seem to matter to me anymore. But there were points in my life where I just had to say, like, okay, well, right now in this moment, that's not, I don't feel strong enough to be around that person,
Yeah.
and take that criticism or their disapproval or whatever, and kind of being able, and then realizing the growth, because then realizing that I could, and saying, okay, well, that's how you feel. That's how you feel. You have every right to feel like that, and not let it. And then it was gone. It was like, okay, I'm done with that, you know?
And what you're saying is it points to like this way of living transformationally. When you can get to the point to have somebody smack you upside of the face, uh, and the next thing that comes out of your mouth is, "Can you tell me more about that?" Like, what's going on for you right now? I get you're upset, but can you give me some nouns and verbs to go along? I mean, toss me toss me a bone here, okay?
Right. Or just this feeling of, I love that. It's like, can you give me a little more? Get curious, and then realize that so much of what I've learned, that so much of what people say
Yeah,
is really about them and really has nothing to do with you,
right.
per se. They're lashing out a lot of the time because of their insecurity and their fear, and not necessarily, and it really has nothing to do with you.
If you just walked around with the mantra in your head, "They're not responding to me," can you imagine how much easier it would be to hold space for people or grant them being and just allow them to go through their moment, and for you're still there. You strapped yourself to the mast. And the bad weather comes and you're still there.
Right. It reminds me of, like somebody, I was on a meeting other day and somebody used this analogy, used this comparison. And I had this image in my mind of my friends, like at the time, like 4-year-old having a tantrum
Right.
and wanting to, and wanting to let, just wanting to have a tantrum.
Yep.
And it's like, okay, you can have your tantrum. It really has nothing to do about me. And then, when you're done, and kids do that, like kids are really good. Like they get all that energy spent up, they cry, they stamp, and then they go out and they play, like nothing has happened.
That happens with 75 and 80-year-olds too.
It does. It does.
Exactly what you just said. Sometimes, right? And I want to make sure that I'm cleaning up any misconceptions here. I am not saying you have to stand in there and take abuse from anybody. However, there's a lot of truth to there is no abuse if you don't experience it. So what we're really saying here is check in and with yourself and check in with the situation and just kind of like hang around and get more information if it's somebody you care about. There are people, as you said earlier, you just can't, you can't spend the time being around them because those are minutes of your life you'll never get back.
Right. And I'm not like that with many. I don't know that, but at points in my life I was really like right now I can't be around that person.
Right.
And I think that it's vital that we start to, like you said, ask those questions and not a critical way. It's in a very curious way. My new coin phrase is if something happens and my initial reaction is one of negativity, like I'm on a meeting and I feel really insecure for whatever reason. And I'll sit there and I'll say to myself, okay, what's this really about? Like, what's really happening here? And realize, like, kind of sit with it and say, like, what is it bringing up for me? Like, what happened to my life that this mirrors that, that exact circumstance,
Yeah. Yeah.
and start to look at, why I'm reacting in a particular way. And not in a critical way, but almost really out of curiosity. Like, this is really interesting. This person makes me feel uncomfortable, or this situation makes me feel uncomfortable. Why do I feel uncomfortable? What happened? Like I said, what happened to me that specific circumstance all of a sudden is bringing up something for me.
It's interesting also, Jan, because sometimes you're thrown to believe it's got something to do with the other person, but it was there before they came into your, you know, your sphere of influence. And quite frankly, depending on what you do for a living and depending on what your commitment to the world is, sometimes you want to take that away and you want to do a little bit of self work, and say, as you said, what's going on with me? And you can't always do that in the middle of the moment. However, you get to a point sooner or later where if you stood in there, you like, I think of dishwashers and people who carry hot food, at restaurants all the time. After a while, they have no feeling in their fingers, which is a great thing. So they can bring the hot food to your table. It's the same thing in our lives too. We've got so many other receptors to be sensitive after the fact. If we don't respond, to hot food by dropping it every single time, maybe we learn something. I don't know. Maybe we do.
Maybe we do. And so you said one thing, and I'm trying to recall what it triggered in me, but it really comes down to wanting, really one is wanting, for what's my reason for doing that? Let's say, is I want to be in situations and not feel that way. That's my motivator. You know, I want to, that's what drives it.
Yeah.
Or, there is a greater reason for me. It's not because, yes, am I overly curious? And sometimes I know what it was. Sometimes I can't figure out what it is exactly. And then I go to like, okay, where is it in my body? How does it feel? And I just start to kind of what I want to say is almost spend time in the energy of it and not label it so much. I mean, I'm a scientist, so I want to put everything into categories and columns and all that kind of stuff. Okay. And do little check marks, like, okay, done, kind of thing. And sometimes it's just for whatever reason in that moment, let's say, it escapes you why you feel so uncomfortable or why you're reacting in a particular way.
Yeah.
And I just have to sit there and say, okay, where do I feel this right now? Like, is it my heart? Or do I feel it in my lower back? Do I feel it in tension in my shoulders? Like, where do I feel it? Um, what is the sensation actually? I'll even tell people. I worked with a friend of mine for a long time who does a practice called Haukumi, which is it's sort of like a therapy, but very like physical sensation, colors and everything. Is it dense? Is it diffuse? And I remember sitting there and saying, like, I couldn't articulate what it was the exact way I was feeling and for what reason, but I could describe those things. And it gave me enough room to then get to the point where I could describe it. Because sometimes I think in the moment we kind of don't understand our reactions and even what we're feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. To that end, if you stop and think about the best life, um, what if the best life is the one where you're not easily upset? What if the best one is, as I think the Dalai Lama, I've heard him say over and over again, that anger is the biggest failure that he can exhibit, because it means that it's taken the place of the love that he's putting into the world. I own that. I mean, that's who I am. I am so public with "I love you" all over Facebook and everybody that I know. And the reason that I am is because that's what I want to talk about. That's the conversation I want to be engaged in. I don't know if you do or not, and I'm perfectly cool if you don't. However, when I think about, the whole notion of holding space, there's something about giving over your power, the power, which is your ability to choose the next thing, your ability to feel great in any circumstance, your ability to witness things that are typically upsetting and not experience it that way. And that's where real power is where you can be effective in the face of things not working, or no agreement or argument, or even people just going against you. And when you're in a position to at least marshal your own skill in terms of who you are, how you respond to things, and the standard and the level of performance that you want to hold yourself to, the quiet man in a chaotic crowd is the one that's in charge, right?
Absolutely.
Whether it's a man or a woman, or whatever.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, anything to put a cherry on top?
Um, no, I mean, I hope that some of what we shared is insightful and helpful to people. Um, and I guess if I was to send people home with, at home, anything, it's just see if you can get in touch with that pause, that moment of space. And it is because it's a place, and I talked about you not being able to kind of, sometimes you can't articulate it. It's just not, whatever it is you're feeling or going through. And allows you a little bit of time to kind of experience that whatever's happening versus, and I say experience because it is an experiential process.
Mhm. Completely agree. So your homework is twofold. As Jan said, see if you can notice where a space can be generated. The second one is, I'm going to ask you to put a question in there.
Hmm.
And then I got one more for you. And Jan, this is, I think you and I can demonstrate to the world without saying I love you, just by calling, texting, writing an email, or sending a letter or card to somebody in your life and let them know that your world works because they're in it. And it makes a huge difference to you knowing that they're out there. And if they ever need anything, if they ever need someone to hold space for them, that you're willing to do that for as long and however it takes.
Absolutely.
So with that said, ladies and gentlemen, I love you. I appreciate you listening to We Are Lighting the Candle, a World That Works. And I'm having a great time today, and I hope you are too. Bye for now.
Bye-bye, everybody.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a World That Works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can catch every episode as well as the rest of the network at exvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.